I'm Clint Curley, and welcome to my Making Magic series where we go through the creation process of... don't even remember. Nissa! We're going through Nissa! I'm Clint Curley, and in this Making Magic video, we're going to be looking at the creation process of Nissa Vital Force, an image I did for Magic the Gathering. And we're going to jump right in and start at the place where it always starts. That is the brief. This is the brief that I received for this project. Now, brief, of course, is the description or the outline that the art director emails to me, letting me know what it is they want me to illustrate. So let's read over, break it down, kind of talk about what I was thinking and how I interpreted this. Nissa Seer of Patterns. This is the placeholder name. They rename them with a final name after I do the illustration. Size full figure with bleed, vertical, planeswalker frame. It is for the Kaladesh setting, green aligned planeswalker. Location against a background of a nature-infused elfish city area. Reference to the style guide so I can look up the other images and make sure I understand what location that is. The action, this is a elf planeswalker Nissa looking slightly over our heads with her green on green eyes. Behind her the skies swirl with ether, symbolizing Nissa's connection with the flowing patterns of nature. Again, references to the sky in the style guide. Maybe Nissa's hand is just beginning to reach up as if she can't resist trying to reach out and grasp the sky. Focus on Nissa herself, and the mood is one of wonder and fascination. The first thing that I thought of when I received this email was to think that they sent this to the wrong person. I'm not joking. At this point, I've been doing illustrations for Magic for about 6 years, and I had never done a Planeswalker. And I checked this email, and I have this one as well as a brief to do a land card, which I had never done before. And I thought, I wonder if they sent this to the wrong person, or maybe they're actually giving me a planeswalker. So immediately I began to get a little nervous because the planeswalkers, those are the tentpole characters of the game. They always get more feature than the other cards and the other characters. So what do we have here? A couple of elements I immediately start thinking about is, what do I need to have in this scene? What do I need to add into my composition? Because from here, I'm going to go over to do my rough thumbnails. And another thing is understanding how you would lay out an image for a planeswalker versus a different image. Starting with the fact that it is, of course, a vertical image. And another thing is that planeswalker images tend to be a little bit different than other images. In other images, you can have characters in these sort of wild action poses and that sort of thing, whereas planeswalkers generally use a centered character in the frame and they're in a fairly static pose. This is a hero shot of the character. While that character may be in a more action pose on other cards that are related to them, on the planeswalker card itself, you need them in a very hero pose, and it's very understandable, and they fill a lot of the frame. So the next thing that I wanted to do was copy the images from the style guide, put those into my reference folder. I did that. I can't show you those guys because those aren't my images, and I don't have the rights to those. And now we're going to jump over to looking at the rough sketches. I did these in my sketchbook and scanned them in so you guys can see them. As I just said, you don't really need this dynamic action pose for a planeswalker. Something a little more straightforward is probably better, but I did play with these two little poses here just to kind of check it off. All right, I considered it, but it was obvious that that did not give the feeling that they requested in the brief, so I quickly abandoned that and went on to play with these. I'm looking at creating variations that would get the right feeling and playing with things like how far is she turned, is she twisting, is she looking up, is she looking at us, is she looking away. Something else I want to draw your attention to is the list. This is a common practice that I do when creating an image, and that is make a list of the different pieces essentially that I can use in this scene.
These would be things like props that the character can be holding or interacting with, as well as visual rhythm elements. As far as props, we have the staff. This is a great thing to be able to use in the image. It's a nice long straight line that you can use as a compositional tool. And as a prop, it's something that you can have her interacting with in different ways. I was a little lucky to get Nissa because she does have this wonderful staff as well as this long braid and cape and waist high fabric. And you can use all those things in nice curves in order to help the dynamics of that scene. Now, someone that does flowing fabrics really well is Howard Lyon, Lyon. He also does images from Magic and other things, of course. So take a look at his work and you can see he does it a little bit different than I do, but he does it really well. Other things that I'm wanting to work out at this stage is exactly what pose I want to go with, as well as compositionally, how am I kind of laying out the scene. Now, compositionally, this is the sort of way I usually do it. Just a big block for the character, basically where is the character located and how much visual area are they taking up. Now, as far as poses, it came down to these two for me, and I ended up going with that guy. The reason is this one ends up being a little more aggressive than what I wanted. When you're wanting to convey a sense of power and aggression, you expand your size of your body. Pufferfish, who wants to look more dangerous, he makes himself puff up real big. When humans want to look more aggressive or more dominant, they expand out. They raise their chest up. They plant their feet wider. They move their arms out. They bring their shoulders back. That's not what we need for this. She's more passive in this scene. She's more inquisitive. When you're kind of in wonder, you tend to draw in your body, not bring your body out. Thus, that is why her legs are together rather than spread out. But because her arm is out here with her staff, then she does need to counter that weight. Thus, the other arm is out to the side to balance her out. And with this decided as the direction I wanted to go, I copy that, I move that to its own document, scale it up, and start using that as the basis to refine the pose and block in the rest of the scene. We'll hop over and look at the other document that has that now. With the direction set with my little thumbnail drawing, I know where I want to go with it. So my next goal is to work up the sketch in order to give to the art director, and that's the way the process works. They give me the brief, I read it, I work up the sketch or sketches, and submit it back to them, and they can either approve that, or they can request changes. And I've decided I'm going to go with lines, clean up the lines, put in colors, and then send in a sketch in that way. But that's not necessarily how you have to do it. I've sent in sketches that were just black and white, I've sent in sketches that were just lines, some that were color. No one approach is supreme over all the others. It's whatever works for your particular image. And I want to clean up the pose. I'm not getting into doing the skeleton and musculature, all that, because I'm immediately going to add the costume on top of it. But this is the way that I set it up. I start with my original layer, and then I lower the opacity of that one about 50%, and then I sketch on top of that with a new multiply layer so that my newer drawing is separate from my rough sketch. I then continue the process by lowering the opacity of the pose layer and sketching the attire on top of it. Not very complicated, it's like using tracing paper. And for this one, as far as the costume of course has already been set with the previous artist in the game. Nissa is a established character for the game. I did not come up with this character, and there was very little that I need to add or adjust on the character. In order to add some more action, some more motion to the scene, incorporate a sense of wind so that her capes and her fabrics are billowing. She's in a very static pose, but that doesn't mean that I can't use her garments in order to bring some extra motion into the scene. I'm just looking at creating interesting shapes right now, something that has a nice silhouette, something that feels like it's in motion. Then I will try to find references of cloth in a similar shape so that I can massage reality to fit my concept. Continuing to block in this scene, I do the background. I'll pull out just so you can see the whole thing there. Of course, you get this file in with your video set, so you can flip through these at a slower pace if you want to and look at that. These are pretty straightforward, just using the basic shapes from the style guide as far as the buildings. And I really waffle back and forth about where I want to put these buildings, what shape they are. And buildings really aren't my thing. I can do them, but I end up spending a lot longer on them than I should. This is just a sketch. I want him to have the general idea of where things are located. And with that established, I want to go in to add the colors. But I want to take a side note here. I did not create this at the time, but I want you just to see, in my mind, I'm already thinking this, which is the value scheme. That's the value scheme of the final. But this is what I have in mind. I'm already thinking the foreground is in shadow and it is a plane darker than the middle ground. Middle ground's in the mid-tones, and the background is in lighter tones. They each have their distinct planes. If you want to know more about values and value schemes, you can check out my YouTube video on values. I established the basic colors. Notice here that I paint everything in shadow, of course, except for the sky. But that is the idea that I want to approach with this scene, is that I paint it in shadow, then I decide where I want to add the lights into the scene. With her, I'm already thinking of two different light sources. Essentially, there is a cool light coming from the sky, coming down there. Since there is no direct light on her, then the only other light hitting her from the top is the blue of the sky, so it's nice and cool. But I'm also thinking that maybe the light is bouncing off of things outside of the scene, or maybe there's a light down here that I'll add that is bouncing back up and hitting the underside of the face, so that there is actually multiple tones of color on the face, and it's just not one flat, solid shadow tone. This would also help me to pull out some more forms in the face, showing the angles of the face with the light hitting in the different directions. It helps keep the entire character having a clean value scheme and keeping her darker than the background. With the shadows, I'm already establishing a warm-cool dynamic. Warm light creates cool shadows. Cool light creates warm shadows in most cases. There is, of course, exceptions to that, which is why I put everything here in the cool value range. The light will be warm, the shadow will be cool, already trying to get that put in. Next step is adding some lightings and some just fast detail. I'll say detail, but obviously it's not really detail, it's just fast detail for the sketch. In this place, what I'm doing is not trying to get into any nuance of lighting. All I'm doing is getting a basic brush, and with linear dodge, I can come over it, and it can give some fairly realistic impressions of light, and that's all I did. This is, like I said, down and dirty, just establish some lights and some colors. I would then go back and not treat that as a final, but create an entirely new layer on top of that and paint it with all of the other subtle colors. But for the sketch alone, I'm just doing it quick colors. I also come up with the idea of the clouds down here. I need some places on this scene where there's softness, soft edges, and places where there's not a lot of detail, places where the eye can kind of rest. So I do continue with the idea of the light hitting this ledge, bouncing up here to her face. And in order to finish up the sketch, I add just some of the magic effects. This is the ether, the all-pervasive magic that goes throughout Kaladesh. And these great towers are the ether collectors. It draws it out of the air, and they use it to power different things in the city. I add the light across her chest here. This serves as a good example of where I want to take the piece. Even though I'm not putting in detailing yet, I'm trying to establish the concept that there is basically warm and cool in the shadows depending on the angle that the object is facing. Anything that's facing upwards is going to have the blue tint from the sky coming down to light it. Anything facing downwards is going to have a warmer tone from the lights coming up back this way. This allows there to be a wider range of the color So not just one green, but cool green, warm green, and middle green all in the mix. With that submitted, I got feedback from the art director, and they liked the direction, but they wanted me to check something. They said, hey, double check how this is going to fit in the Planeswalker frame. And he was absolutely right, because it was not going to fit in there very well. Essentially, the frame is way up here. What I end up having to do is reposition everything so it's like that. And you can see the difference there. I had to move her up. I also made her a little bit bigger and have to tweak around where the buildings are going to be located so that some of them are located in the right spot within this frame. Although they will show the whole image, most of this will be covered up. Another note on Planeswalker cards themselves, different from other cards, is that you can have them overlap a little bit on the outsides. Normal cards do not let you do that. So she is specifically placed so that there was a little overlap going on there. Now what I need to do is essentially take a couple of steps back and work this up properly. All of this is in one layer right now. All my colors are in one layer. All my lines are in one layer. The lines are over the colors and the lines are set to multiply. Now I need to start separating things out so that I can work it up properly and move things around. First thing that I needed to do was to get her onto her own layer. All I did was got the lasso tool, outlined her, copied her, pasted her onto her own layer, and then I started painting her out of the background, which is where I come up with this. That way, I can paint the background by itself and not worry about accidentally painting into Nissa. I can also repose or reposition Nissa on her own layer without affecting the background. Take the time to do that if you're working on a bigger image. If you need to step back and reestablish the foundation and reestablish your layers so that it can save you time in the long run, go ahead and do that. That's what we did here. With the feedback handled and her repositioned, it was now time to start the actual painting process, the stuff that would take me to the final. And that meant looking at more references and stopping at this point and saying, okay, I know pretty much where I'm going with this image as far as content, but as far as mood and color, let's take a second and decide where we want to go. And what I wanted to do was make a change with the colors and with the lighting, because up to this point, I'd just been pulling colors out of my head. I really hadn't been referencing anything. I was just putting together something fast and use basic, straightforward colors. But now I needed to step away from crayon colors. And crayon colors is the sort of idea that sky is always blue and leaves are always green, but that's not the way the real world works. I needed to go a little more realistic, a little more nuanced, so that's where I start making this change. Obviously, there's a pretty big difference here. It's not just grayer, but I've moved it to being a little different on the color scheme. The light here on the clouds, for instance, is very blue, but I warmed that up a lot here. I make the clouds a lot warmer. So essentially the sky is cool and the clouds are warm. And that warm cool is something I'm trying to play against each other throughout the image, keeping things away from just being one particular temperature throughout. I did reference numerous other photos and artwork in order to come up with what I wanted for this color scheme. This is a little too desaturated, so I do end up adding some more color back into it, but we'll look at that as I go. Also notice the big changes with the sky. I'm deciding I'm going to use the clouds as a major element as far as composition, and I really don't think I handled the sky and the buildings as well as I should have. I end up being pretty happy with Nissa herself, but I didn't spend enough time perhaps establishing exactly what I wanted from the city in the background, and I burned too much time trying to figure that out as I go, where I probably should have spent just an extra day at the beginning or an extra 4 hours or something just really defining what I wanted with that. But I did it as I went along. After getting the color change that I wanted, it was time to then start figuring out the buildings. And You can see a couple of spots here that have all this extra rendering detail. I didn't paint those. Those are from the style guide. And a practice of mine is to just grab a piece from the style guide, pull it over here, drop it in, and let that serve as sort of a starting point as far as colors and values and details and architecture. That allows me to have something to reference against. If you don't have anything to reference against, it's hard to make good judgments. Continuing with the buildings, just blocking in the buildings again. Another thing from the style guide, dropping it in, thinking maybe I want a building in between the two of these. In the end, I think maybe I should have left something there, but I didn't. Ended up painting it out. You can see I'm just moving things around back here a lot. And I'm also trying to figure out this perspective issue. What's going on here is something that I really hadn't dealt with before, which is on the top of this scene, you're of course looking upwards. However, the horizon line is somewhere around here, which means that everything down here, you're looking downwards. Everything here is going pinching towards the top. Everything down here is pinching towards the bottom. So you have this fish-eyed bend to everything. And when you start bending tall buildings, it can just look like you rendered it wrong unless you handle it really well. I think I did okay in the end, but perhaps I could have handled it a little better. Sky and ether. I've moved away from the idea of using the sort of magnetic coil designs from this. I decided to switch it up to this sort of design, which is more three-dimensional. This is almost a cone that branches out with one major stem in the middle of the ether coming back down. Also had the idea that the clouds themselves are affected by this ether collection, and they start swirling around the ether as it's being drawn in. I do like that idea, and I'm glad that I went with it. However, I don't know where I thought that this arrangement was good. Having two ether collectors in the sky, the same size, on either side of the head is not a good compositional decision. So if you haven't noticed yet, I don't do perfect images. And I recognize mistakes in my image. Okay, I make mistakes just like anyone. But what I want to do is come back at it later and look at it and just be real with myself and say, okay, what did I get right? What did I get wrong? How can I learn from this to go on and not make that mistake later? How could I have done it better? If you can't answer how you can do it better, if you don't know what you can learn from it in order to look out for it later, then you really haven't gained anything from the image. In this case, that was not a good compositional decision. What should have been better is to offset them so that you had a pattern to it. Perhaps a triangle pattern like that with an ether collection here, a bigger one here, and a really big one there so that part of it goes off and this one's here and that one's there. And that way that you have a better sense of depth because you have diminishing size as it goes away from you. You could have also done it by just offsetting this one here with that one being halfway behind the fabric, other than that one being pretty much where it is. That could have also worked. Anyway, not the best decision, and we'll move on from that point. I am thinking about putting the light on the face. I do come up with this. And this is for several reasons. One is eyes are naturally drawn to the highest point of contrast and the most saturation, and faces. I don't feel like there is enough attention on the face. There is some attention drawn to the head simply because it is a head and you look at them. I did try variations. So I made this study up and I've tried lighting in different combinations. This one really wasn't enough because it didn't bring enough extra color and contrast to the area. This one was good. This one is possible if the face was much bigger in the scene, but as it is, that little side light would be so thin on the card as to be almost unseeable. This is okay, again, if the face was going to be larger in the scene, but as it is when it gets small, all you have is these little various points of light and not one unified light across the face. It's too broken up. And for this, what I did was just put in that one base face, and I'm going to just select the skin tone around here. And again, used my brush, I think probably use something soft, set that to linear dodge. I don't remember which warm tone I used, probably something in this range. And that gives me a pretty realistic tone of colors. And the great thing about the linear dodge setting is that it comes up with variations so that you can see within this range there is already yellow and peach and pink, and it goes over to violet from one color, and that's why it's so great. It does a realistic job of how light affects things. I then can go back with my normal brush and paint in exactly the tones that I want. I clean it up and I massage it into being more realistic, but that gives me the right colors and basis to work from. I wanted to keep light away from the top of the face, and this is the reason. Her eyes glow. So that was the situation. On one hand, I needed the face to be in shadow because I need her green eyes to be showing up with the glow, but I also need a light on the face so that there would be contrast and color there to draw your eye to it. Thus, I ended up with this lighting that you see. Okay, moving on, repositioning the sky and rebuilding. I'll pull out so we can see the full thing here. Start taking the towers out of the image and putting the sky on its own layer so I can paint them individually. And I remove that. Oh, this is a change I really start making. Down here with the clouds, I really got this idea from concept art for Halo 4. To be honest, that is some of the best concept art that I have seen for a game or almost for anything. I don't remember the artist's name offhand, but they created some stunning concept art with the giant towers of the Halo going through the sky and these twisting clouds going around it, and some of them catching the light and some of them are in shadow. And I was just so impressed by those images. And I just want the chance to paint some clouds like that, and this place could be the place where I could do that. And so I decided I wanted to start working those in. So please go out there and look at those images. I don't own the images. I can't show them to you in this video. You can see where I'm trying to add those in. You can see the lit areas, some here. The areas that go into the shadow behind the towers are there. Pick a brighter color so you can see it. Also down here, this area getting some light. And it helps to break up all these straight, hard lines from the buildings. And down here, just obscuring different areas where I don't want detail. I don't want detail everywhere. Just because you can have detail doesn't mean it's going to make the piece better. Sometimes you want to obscure things. You want to add some atmosphere, and that is the perfect combination with this. So earlier I just had this basic platform, decided it needed to have some architecture that would fit into Kaladesh. So I came up with this thing. I really didn't have much of a reference for it. I just kind of came up with it on the fly. And then put some light onto it. The reason for this is that there would be the opportunity to throw some warm light up onto the character. I could have some warm light bouncing off of her armor and her boots, and I could get some warm light up underneath the fabric. I thought that's pretty cool, and it also gets some light down there on the scene. That idea doesn't last long because I immediately understood I don't need light down there. This amount of bright light and warm color and contrast would pull the eye down there. And why do I need the eye down there? I don't. There's nothing of interest down here, really. This is just here to serve the character, and I don't need to be drawing attention down here. So I immediately paint it out. Like I've said previously in other videos, put light where you want people to look. I don't want people to necessarily look down there, so I take the direct light off of it. So flip that on and off, little changes being made, put the other tower in there. I also adjust the arm. I double checked some references. I took reference photos of myself in that pose, and I just noticed the arm was a little short, so pretty simple fix doing that. Fabrics. Now is the time to really get back to Nissa and start establishing some things that need to get in there. With the fabric, I already had it outlined. I just wanted lots of these layers that are just ruffling around, but I needed to have some references. Fabric has a certain nature to it, the way that it folds, and I usually like to look at it in order to try to start mimicking those folds. Another thing is that fabrics bend in different ways and behave in different ways depending on what kind of fabric it is. I was looking at the fabric in some of the reference images and noticed that I thought it was catching on a lady's arm or a leg or something, and it was bending around. I thought, oh, that's what I like. The idea that this wind is catching it, but it's being caught on the staff. So I play with that idea and I let it wrap up around the staff. Again, just showing a little realism with the way that it would behave. Playing around with the background, trying to warm it up a little bit, thinking that this whole area is probably a bit warmer, and trying to separate Nissa out from the background, not just value-wise, which is working pretty well, but temperature-wise, so that she is on a whole cooler than this background area, which has more atmospheric light, and it's going to get more warm. Detailing the character. Okay, let's pull up here and take a look what's going on. Of course, pulled up references for the character. Nissa already being established. I looked at a lot of other artwork just to see how they rendered her. Looked at more fabric reference to see how it was folding. I try to freehand it. Don't be afraid of references, okay? References can give that extra realism that you need. It's hard to memorize all the behaviors of different kinds of fabrics. It's hard to have a mental library of everything. So don't be afraid of references. You only know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know, and go find stuff if you don't know it. With the lighting in this area, I'm trying to do a couple of things. One is really letting the light blow out on the areas that are lit and having a little subsurface scattering right along the edge. So wherever there's a nice bright light, the purest tone of color is going to be right between the light and the shadow, where there's enough mid-tone that it can get vibrant, but it's not dark enough that the shadow is cooling it down. So doing that, you can see that there, you can see it even in the fabric. So you see some warm tones here, you see warm tones here as the light is actually coming through the fabric. And there's some warm tones being bounced back up on the underside of this, as well as the underside of that. So anything hitting this fabric is going to warm up from the sky and bounce back up and carry that warmth to other parts. Trying to keep a mid-tone on the skin. So instead of just having bright skin lit right up to the edge, I want to have a mid-tone right there on the edge. So there is a transition between the shadow and the light. It keeps the neck to look a little more rounded. If you light it right up to the edge and you don't have that mid-tone and you use that a lot, it can make things seem really flat, like there's a complete hard edge to a flat plain edge, or she looks cut out, and that's not what we want. So we add some mid-tones to blend the two together. We're getting really close to just the absolute slowest part of the image, which is the detailing stage. I probably spend as much time to go from here to the final, or maybe from here to the final, as I did from the start to here. You can watch speed painting videos. of guys putting together these concepts in an hour or two and just watch the time lapse of it and think, oh my gosh, this must take them no time to do these images. You can throw together a concept really quickly, but it's not going to have polish to it. And don't think that there is any way to get around details. Details just take a long time. There's just days of details spent on this image. I'm not really a detailing guy. I love the beginning process. I love coming up with the composition and the sketch and figuring out the lighting. When it comes to details, I just sort of start losing interest. But that is part of the process. And if you're like me, then you just have to learn. You just do it. All you do is you pick an area and you start working on it. And then you move to the next area and you start working on it. And you move to the next area and you work on it. And you just make sure that you go across every area of the image so that everything has some attention. Now, everything doesn't have to have the same amount of detail. That's probably not even a good idea, but every area has to be addressed so that it is not unfinished. And that is a mistake that a lot of novice artists do, is they don't go back and give every area attention. They block it in and they finish the area that they want and then they call it finished. And you're going, but yeah, you never went back and handled this problem. You never fixed this issue. Background, refine. Everything was general up to this point in the background, but now I have to be specific. These are the final strokes that are going to be the image. What are they going to be? So with the clouds, I'm really just picking them out, cleaning up the edges, figuring exactly what shapes I want, trying to find unique patterns, trying to find organic patterns. And you can see here, I'm working with the idea of having basically 3 tones or 2 different lightings on the clouds. The clouds are naturally that cool in the shadow, but I have the warm tone from everything hitting the city and coming back up. And then also I have the bright light from the sky coming down. Those two together give a really nice 3-dimensionality to the clouds, and I really love that. Again, this is something that I picked up from the Halo 4 concept art, and I just love the way that he rendered the clouds on that and applied that knowledge to my image. With the edges of the clouds, I did use a smudge tool. And I used, I think it was my bristly brush. I think it was this guy. And I could just drag that, whatever strength I had set on that, I don't remember. It's probably 50 or something. And you can just grab that and start wiggling it around and get some of those edges. Oh, maybe I used my other one. Maybe it was this one. It's probably that one, set up higher. And that is where I came up with some of these little wispy edges. And instead of having to, of course, hand draw all those little bits. Details, cleaning up the sky, reestablishing the ether being collected. Anything else here? Oh, I started putting in the details of the character's attire, and this helps the believability a lot. Just pay attention to the way that things are actually made, showing how things fit together, how things are attached to each other. And that can add to the realism, like something is really thought out, having things like stitching. Now, these sort of details aren't going to make your image, but if you have a strong image to begin with, adding these details give that extra bit of believability to it. Thickness to the cloth, weaving into the leather, down here showing the thickness of the fabric, and having different fabric textures is a nice effect. In order to take this to the final, I do the final details. Let's look at some of the small stuff. These things would never be seen on the card. They are simply too little to be printed on the card, but I knew this image would be seen larger in various formats, so some details were added that would only be visible in those situations. And that is playing with the texture of the fabric. I use brush strokes in a sort of wiggle pattern in order to give a texture to this fabric as being a bit rougher and a coarser than it looked previously. You can turn that on and off, and you can see how this fabric changes. I also reworked that based on some references. This can be a nice effect. You don't have to do it everywhere. Just do it on areas that are most important. That is usually right along a couple of the contours so that you can see it silhouetted. The silhouette is a great place to indicate the texture of something. So having those little bits of fabric sticking up there helps sell it. Same thing along that edge. You can see I added a couple of spots down there. I distress it a little bit along the edges, saying that some of these are probably fraying. She wears this cloak a lot, different little frays around the edges. And pull out and see what else we did. Had the ether put onto another layer to add some other color. I also want to draw the eye back up the scene. This is really a compositional decision to have the ether there to circle the eye back up this direction. Otherwise, this doesn't really do anything. There's nothing to get your eye back into the scene from that. Same thing down here. Essentially, this cloud and this ether keep you out of this corner so that you have that all trying to circle you back up. And you can see this creates this line, this tower creates this line. So everything is trying to get you back up here to the head. That is the final image. And that is what I sent in. That's what's printed. But is it a perfect image? Absolutely not. And if I could go back and change some things, I would. Firstly, maybe practice building some more. My buildings are okay in this image, but I don't think they really captured the elegancy of the Kaladesh architecture, and I would change that. We already touched on the compositional mistakes of having those there. Another little compositional mistake is a near tangent. Tangent being two things that are touching, or my art teacher used to call it kissing lines. Compositionally, having this coming down here and having this coming here and this coming here, all hitting at this point, is not a good decision. All right, it looks like she is almost trying to touch that, when obviously that is in a completely different plane, and it shouldn't be that way. Either this thing needed to be bigger so that it is underneath her hand or overlapped by her hand, or it needed to be much smaller, or it needed to be pushed over to a side. But where it is, not a good decision. Also, having the tower kissing up right at the end of her hand, not a good decision. Tower probably should have been moved over a little bit. This is not a great decision to have this by itself over here either. A big round simple shape like that is really a visual magnet, and it should be broken up. I probably should have a little one right there to break it up, or maybe a little tower on the front of this, or maybe both of them. Something to change that from just being one large simple round shape. Another problem is just my rendering of form. I got this off. Okay, this is basically a big flat disc. And if this disc continued on the other side, it'd be somewhere there. In the middle would be somewhere there if you take it straight down, right about there. All of these little awning bits should be part of the spokes coming out. So coming from there, that should be at this angle. This should be at this angle. This should be coming out of here more like that, not like this. And the same thing here. This should be coming out at this angle. So I'm not sure where I got so far off on that. But yeah, my form drawing got off on that. Otherwise, Nissa herself I'm pretty happy with. As I noticed later, she kind of dropped a couple of bra sizes during the course of the drawing. So I should have went back and added a little bit back into that. But you work with it enough and you just start manipulating edges and cleaning things up, and I made that mistake. I hope that you guys have enjoyed watching this video. I do continue the Making Magic series on my Patreon. If you want to get more content like this, then the best way to do it is become a patron at patreon.com/swatches. This video is made possible by my patrons. I would not have the time to take off to do these if my patrons did not support me. So all of you guys, thank you very much for supporting me. I enjoy talking about this stuff. I hope you guys can learn from it. And don't forget to check out the other part of the video, which is the portfolio review, bonus content. Maybe you can learn some things from that as well. And until I see you guys next time, keep drawing.